Truth is often obscured not by complex conspiracies or coordinated efforts, but by the far simpler and far more common forces of assumption, familiarity, and habit. Most of the misunderstandings that shape our perceptions don't come from hidden agendas or secret operations. They come from the things we accept without questioning, the stories we repeat without examining, and the patterns of thought we inherit without realizing it. When people talk about the real story they don't want you to know, it's easy to imagine powerful figures deliberately hiding information. But far more often, the barriers that block us from the truth are constructed by everyday human tendencies. The tendency to jump to conclusions, to trust what feels comfortable, or to avoid ideas that challenge what we already believe. Assumptions are powerful precisely because they operate quietly. They slip into our thinking without asking permission. They shape the way we interpret new information, often causing us to overlook facts that don't fit our expectations. We assume that because something has always been done a certain way, it must be the right way. We assume that because a belief is popular, it must be accurate. We assume that because a voice is loud, it must be authoritative. These are invisible filters that color how we see the world. And unless we actively examine them, they control the narrative more effectively than any deliberate deception. Another reason assumptions hide the truth is that they help us feel secure. Certainty is comfortable. Uncertainty is not. When we cling to familiar explanations, we avoid the discomfort of admitting that we might have been mistaken or that the situation might be more complex than we thought. This desire for mental comfort can cause us to reject new evidence, oversimplify complicated issues, or overlook contradictions in the stories we tell ourselves. And because this process happens inside us, not outside, we rarely notice it happening. Miscommunication also plays a significant role. We live in a constantly connected world where information moves faster than reflection. Headlines travel far before context catches up. Short clips are shared thousands of times before the full story is read even once. In this environment, assumptions become even more dangerous because they fill in the blanks where facts are missing. Instead of admitting, "I don't know," people often lean on what they already expect to be true. This is not malicious, it is human, but the effect is the same. The real story becomes harder to see. Another layer of the problem is that people tend to trust what their communities trust. Family, friends, cultural groups, and even online circles all create shared assumptions, ideas that everyone in the group takes for granted. These shared beliefs become social glue, and questioning them can feel like betraying the group. So people often stay silent, not because they are hiding the truth, but because challenging assumptions requires courage, and courage is rarely the easiest path. All of this means that the truth is rarely hidden behind locked doors. More often, it is buried beneath layers of untested ideas, emotional comfort, and collective habits of thought. To uncover it, we don't need to decode secret messages. We need to be willing to question ourselves. We need curiosity more than suspicion, patience more than outrage, and humility more than certainty. By recognizing how assumptions shape our worldview, we reclaim the power to think freely, to seek clarity, and to understand the world not as it is whispered to us, but as it truly is. In the idea that individuals possess far more influence, intelligence, and agency than they are often led to believe. Power is not something reserved solely for leaders, institutions, or experts. It is something that belongs to every person who chooses to think, question, and act with intention. Many people go through life assuming that real change is created only by those who hold official positions or have large platforms, but history repeatedly shows that meaningful transformation begins with individuals who recognize their own capacity to shape the world around them. The story that They don't want you to know is not a tale of secret forces limiting your potential. It is the simple truth that you are capable of far more than you may realize. Individual empowerment often begins with the decision to pay attention to your instincts, your questions, your discomfort, and your curiosity. Too often, people are encouraged to downplay their insights or defer to authority without fully understanding the situation. While expert knowledge is valuable, it should never replace your ability to think critically. When individuals trust their own reasoning, they become less susceptible to misinformation, manipulation, or passive acceptance. Empowerment starts the moment you give yourself permission to examine issues deeply instead of accepting surface level explanations just because they are convenient or widely repeated. Another element of empowerment is understanding that your voice has weight, whether or not you see immediate results. Speaking up at work, in your community, or within your relationships can set off a chain reaction. Sometimes people stay silent because they assume their opinions won't matter, but silence is precisely what allows ineffective systems, unfair practices, and unchallenged beliefs to persist. When one person raises a concern, others who have been holding back often find the courage to do the same. When one person proposes a new idea, it can unlock innovation in others. Change almost always begins with a single voice that decides to be heard. Empowerment also means recognizing your ability to make decisions that shape your life. You choose what information to trust, what values to uphold, and what actions you take in response to challenges. Even when circumstances limit certain options, the power to respond thoughtfully remains yours. This internal authority is something no institution or system can fully control. When you recognize that your choices, even small ones, carry meaning, you begin to realize that you are not a passive observer, but an active participant in your own future. Too often, people underestimate their skills and intelligence because they compare themselves to polished experts or charismatic leaders. But expertise is built, not born, and leadership begins long before someone gains a title. The people who make the greatest impact are not necessarily the ones with the most resources, but the ones with the most determination, consistency, and willingness to learn. Every individual possesses unique perspectives shaped by their experiences, perspectives that cannot be replicated by anyone else. When you undervalue your own voice, the world loses insight it cannot get from another source. Another important aspect of empowerment is the understanding that you do not need to be perfect to make a difference. Many people hesitate to take action because they fear being wrong or worry about how others will react. Yet progress rarely comes from perfect confidence. It comes from imperfect attempts that gradually build momentum. Growth happens when people take risks, try new approaches, and learn from mistakes. Empowered individuals accept that uncertainty is part of every meaningful journey. Ultimately, the message is that power is not something waiting to be granted. It is something you already possess. Your ability to question, to think, to speak, and to choose is a form of power that, when embraced, becomes unstoppable. The real story they don't want you to know is not hidden or dramatic. It is simply this: you are capable, influential, and essential to the world's progress. Critical thinking stands at the center of uncovering truth, not because it guarantees perfect answers, but because it equips us with the tools to navigate a world filled with complexity, noise, and conflicting perspectives. In an age where information is abundant and attention is scarce, the ability to think deeply and carefully is not just useful, it is essential. Many challenges today do not arise from a lack of information, but from the lack of thoughtful interpretation. Critical thinking is the process that helps us slow down, examine what we are told, and distinguish between genuine understanding and surface level assumptions. At its core, critical thinking begins with curiosity, the willingness to ask questions rather than accept ideas at face value. But curiosity on its own is only the first step. What truly empowers people is the commitment to follow those questions honestly, even when the answers lead to uncomfortable truths or challenge long held beliefs. This requires humility because it means accepting that our initial impressions may be incomplete or mistaken. It means recognizing that no single viewpoint holds the entire truth, and that gaining clarity often involves exploring perspectives we might not naturally gravitate toward. The importance of critical thinking also lies in its ability to protect us from manipulation. Whether intentional or accidental, misleading information spreads quickly, especially when it appeals to emotions like fear, anger, or excitement. Critical thinking teaches us to pause before reacting, to examine the source, and to evaluate the evidence. It helps us separate emotional triggers from factual content, and it shields us from becoming passive consumers of whatever message happens to be loudest. When we think critically, we become far less vulnerable to sensationalism and far more grounded in reason. Another powerful aspect of critical thinking is that it encourages depth over speed. Modern life often rewards quick answers, rapid opinions, and instant conclusions. Yet the most important truths rarely reveal themselves immediately. They require examination, interpretation, and reflection. Critical thinking slows us down, not to hinder us, but to help us see more clearly. It reminds us that understanding takes time and that taking time is not a weakness but a strength. Rushing to judgment may feel satisfying in the moment, but it usually leads to shallow conclusions and missed insights. Critical thinking is also a collaborative skill. Although it involves independent thought, it thrives in environments where ideas are exchanged respectfully and openly. When people engage with one another's viewpoints, challenge assumptions, and refine arguments, the quality of understanding increases. This does not mean agreeing on everything. Rather, it means being willing to test ideas through dialogue. True discussion does not aim to win, but to illuminate. When individuals think critically together, communities become wiser, not just louder. In addition, critical thinking empowers individuals to navigate uncertainty. Many topics in life do not have simple answers, and some issues remain unresolved for long periods. Critical thinking does not eliminate uncertainty, but it gives us the confidence to operate within it. It teaches us that uncertainty is not a sign of ignorance, but a natural part of exploration. Instead of avoiding confusion, we learn to examine it. Instead of fearing complexity, we learn to break it down. Instead of seeking the simplest explanation just for the comfort of clarity, we learn to appreciate nuance. Ultimately, critical thinking is a form of freedom. It frees us from blind acceptance. It frees us from the pressure of conformity. It frees us from the influence of misinformation. Most importantly, it frees us from the limits we place on ourselves when we assume we already know everything we need to know. The truth rarely arrives in a neat package. It must be discovered, questioned, refined, and understood. Critical thinking is the process through which that discovery becomes possible, and it is the skill that ensures we navigate the world not with closed eyes, but with an open mind. Progress throughout history has rarely been the result of powerful leaders acting alone. Instead, it has come from ordinary people who refused to accept the world as it was and had the courage to imagine what it could be. This truth often gets lost beneath the spotlight that focuses on famous names and dramatic moments. But behind every movement, every innovation, and every social transformation are countless individuals whose persistence, questions, and small acts of bravery created the foundation for change. The idea that only authorities or influential figures shape the future is comforting in a way. It allows people to step back and believe that progress is someone else's responsibility. But the real story, the one that matters, is that the world is changed by people who look very much like you. Every major shift begins quietly, long before it becomes visible. Progress takes root in conversations between neighbors, in questions asked in classrooms, in disagreements at dinner tables, and in ideas scribbled in notebooks. Ordinary people are the ones who challenge harmful norms simply by refusing to accept them. They are the ones who see injustice and speak up, not because they have power, but because they have conscience. When someone decides that enough is enough, even if they stand alone at first, they plant a seed of change that others can recognize and join. Many individuals contribute to progress without ever realizing it. A single person's decision to mentor someone, to share information, or to act with integrity can set off a chain reaction. Someone chooses to help a friend understand a complex issue. Someone else volunteers their time in their community. Another person takes the initiative at work to fix an inefficient system. These actions may seem small, but they accumulate. Eventually, they shift attitudes, influence decisions, and transform culture. Ordinary people often underestimate the ripple effect of their choices because the results are not immediate or dramatic. Yet history shows that the greatest movements were built from many small steps taken by many different people. Another reason progress comes from ordinary individuals is that they are the ones closest to real problems. Leaders and institutions may create policies, but everyday people experience the consequences of those policies. They understand what works and what doesn't in daily life. They see the gaps that need filling, the systems that need improving, and the voices that need amplifying. Because they live the reality, their insights are more grounded, practical, and authentic. This lived experience fuels ideas that are meaningful rather than theoretical, doable rather than symbolic. Courage also plays a role. Ordinary people often show extraordinary bravery simply by refusing to stay silent. They make difficult decisions to speak up at work, to question a norm in their community, to challenge a belief in their family, or to advocate for someone who cannot advocate for themselves. These moments of courage rarely make headlines, but they change environments. Once one person speaks, others find the strength to join in. Once one person questions the status quo, others begin to see that change is possible. Courage is contagious, and it is usually sparked by those who act from conviction rather than authority. Innovation, too, is not limited to experts. Many breakthroughs come from people who approach problems with fresh eyes and curiosity. Ordinary individuals experiment, tinker, imagine, and create. They notice what others overlook, ask questions others avoid, and propose ideas others think are too bold. Because they are not bound by rigid structures or institutional expectations, they often see possibilities that experts miss. Ultimately, progress is not a gift handed down from the powerful. It is a collective effort built by individuals who care enough to act. The world moves forward when ordinary people take responsibility for their thoughts, their voices, and their actions. When enough individuals choose curiosity over complacency, courage over silence, and compassion over indifference, they create momentum that no institution can ignore. The real story is that change belongs to everyone, and progress is written by countless hands working toward a better future. Sharing information and raising voices have always been the engines of meaningful change, even when the world tries to convince us that silence is safer or that only certain people are qualified to speak. Societies don't transform because a single leader declares a new direction. They transform when people communicate openly, challenge harmful ideas, and bring hidden realities into the light. Transparency and dialogue allow communities to understand one another, question flawed systems, and build solutions rooted in collective experience rather than isolated authority. When individuals choose to share their perspectives, they help create a culture where truth can be examined rather than controlled, and where progress becomes a shared endeavor instead of a top down command. The power of sharing information lies in its ability to break cycles of misunderstanding. Misinformation thrives in silence, spreading most easily when people hesitate to ask questions or express uncertainty. But when individuals start exchanging ideas, comparing experiences, and offering facts from their own lives, those misunderstandings lose their grip. A community that speaks to one another becomes harder to manipulate. It becomes more resilient, more alert, and more capable of identifying when something doesn't add up. Each voice contributes a piece of clarity, and collectively, those pieces form a more complete picture of reality. Voices matter not only because they express ideas, but because they humanize issues. Data can illustrate a trend, but a personal story can inspire empathy and action. When people share their stories, whether about challenges they've faced, injustices they've witnessed, or solutions they've discovered, they transform abstract problems into human experiences. This storytelling builds connection, and connection builds momentum for change. Movements grow when individuals stop hiding their experiences and begin realizing that others feel the same. What starts as one person's voice becomes a chorus capable of shifting public consciousness. Transparency is equally vital. When people share information openly, they build trust, and trust is the foundation of any functional society. Without transparency, suspicion grows. People begin to assume the worst about institutions, leaders, and even one another. But open communication counters this dynamic. It invites participation, fosters accountability, and signals that everyone deserves access to the truth. Communities become stronger when information flows freely and weaker when it is restricted. Transparency creates an environment where solutions can be developed collaboratively rather than imposed without explanation. Raising voices doesn't always mean speaking loudly. Sometimes it means speaking clearly, consistently, and with purpose. Some of the most influential changes in history began with quiet conversations. Someone teaching a neighbor a new skill, someone correcting a harmful stereotype, someone asking a question others were too afraid to raise. These seemingly small acts of communication ripple outward. One person speaks up, another feels encouraged, and eventually a collective awareness forms. When voices accumulate, even institutions that once seemed immovable must respond. It's also important to recognize that raising a voice is an act of courage. Many people hesitate to speak because they fear judgment, backlash, or being misunderstood. But silence rarely protects. It merely preserves the status quo. Those who choose to speak, even when their voice shakes, create space for others to join them. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else, truth, justice, dignity, matters more. And every courageous voice makes it easier for the next person to find their strength.